is usually told through declarations of war, thunderous protests, and sweeping revolutions. But sometimes, history changes quietly, behind stone walls, iron bars, and locked cell doors. Political prisons are built for a single purpose: to silence voices that challenge authority. Yet on rare occasions, those very prisons become the birthplace of transformation. Inside them, prisoners become symbols. Their escapes become catalysts, and their freedom, whether seized by force, granted through pressure, or achieved in a daring midnight operation, reshapes governments, topples regimes, and ignites mass movements. This is the story of 10 political figures whose escapes or releases shook nations and altered political destinies. Ranked from 10th to 1st, each case reveals a powerful truth. A cell can hold a body, but never an idea. Nelson Mandela entered prison as the most dangerous man in South Africa, not because he carried a weapon, but because he carried a vision. As a leader of the African National Congress, ANC, and its armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, Mandela fought the apartheid regime that enforced white minority rule over millions. Arrested during the Rivonia trial in 1964, he declared, "I am prepared to die," accepting a life sentence rather than betraying his cause. Mandela would spend 27 years behind bars, much of it on the isolated Robben Island, where guards tried to break him through hard labor and psychological humiliation. But prison backfired. Mandela became a martyr, a global symbol of resistance. International sanctions strangled the apartheid government, and South Africa faced civil war. Finally, in 1990, President F.W. de Klerk made a historic calculation. Releasing Mandela was the only way to save the nation. Mandela walked out not as a freed prisoner, but as the future of a new South Africa. Within 4 years, apartheid fell. Mandela became the nation's first democratically elected president and won the Nobel Peace Prize alongside de Klerk. His escape wasn't a breakout. It was a political earthquake that dismantled a system. Ho Chi Minh spent much of his life in motion, evading empires, organizing resistance, and fighting for Vietnamese self-rule. But in the early 1940s, the revolutionary found himself behind bars in China, detained by the Kuomintang. For more than a year, he was shuttled between prisons in brutal conditions. Yet even in captivity, Ho Chi Minh refused defeat. His writings from this period, including prison poems, circulated widely and elevated his image from activist to national savior. When he was finally released, Ho Chi Minh returned to Vietnam with even greater moral authority. His imprisonment became propaganda fuel against colonial powers. Within years, he led the Viet Minh to victory over France at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, and became the first president of North Vietnam, laying the foundation for eventual reunification in 1975. To this day, his famous line, "Nothing is more precious than independence and freedom," remains tied to his legacy as the architect of a nation liberated. Kim Dae-jung was the conscience of South Korea during its darkest authoritarian decades. A fierce critic of military dictatorships, he survived kidnapping, assassination attempts, and a death sentence. In 1980, he was imprisoned for sedition, a charge widely seen as fabricated. Only US and international pressure stopped his execution, reducing his sentence to life in prison, then exile. But instead of silencing him, prison transformed Kim into the symbol of Korea's pro-democracy struggle. His supporters mobilized, students marched, dissidents united. When South Korea finally democratized, Kim Dae-jung returned, ran for president, and in 1997 became the first opposition leader in the nation's history to win power democratically. His presidency stabilized democratic institutions and launched the Sunshine Policy, which opened unprecedented dialogue with North Korea and earned him the 2000 Nobel Peace Prize. His escape from authoritarian control through survival, not jailbreak, reshaped a nation's political identity. Anwar Ibrahim's story is one of the most dramatic political resurrections of the modern era. Once Malaysia's rising star and deputy prime minister, he was abruptly fired in 1998, arrested on politically motivated charges, and beaten in custody. His conviction ignited the Reformasi movement, the largest pro-democracy push in Malaysia's history. Anwar's imprisonment turned him from politician to symbol, a living indictment of corruption and authoritarian abuse. Released in 2004, then jailed again in 2015, Anwar remained the rallying point for Malaysia's fragmented opposition. His name became synonymous with political courage. Finally, in 2018, after massive electoral pressure, he received a royal pardon. That same year, the opposition coalition he inspired achieved the unthinkable, defeating the ruling party that had dominated Malaysia for 61 years. In 2022, Anwar Ibrahim became prime minister, completing a 24-year journey from prison cell to the highest office. His escape came through endurance, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful jailbreak is simply outlasting your jailer. In the shipyards of Gdansk, electrician Lech Wałęsa ignited a movement that would topple a superpower. As co-founder of Solidarity, the first independent trade union in the Soviet bloc, Wałęsa represented millions of workers demanding not just wages, but dignity. The communist regime responded with martial law. Wałęsa was arrested in 1981 and interned for nearly a year. But prison only magnified his influence. Solidarity grew from underground networks into a national movement with 10 million members, a quarter of Poland's population. Wałęsa's eventual release in 1982 was an admission that the government had failed to crush the opposition. By 1989, at the Roundtable talks, Wałęsa negotiated the first partially free elections in the Eastern Bloc. Communism in Poland collapsed, soon followed by the fall of the Berlin Wall. Wałęsa later became president, proving that a prisoner could become the engineer of a continent's liberation. Playwright, dissident, prisoner, president. Václav Havel was the poetic voice of Czechoslovakia's conscience. For his leadership in the Charter 77 human rights movement, Havel was imprisoned multiple times, spending nearly 5 years in communist jails. His letters, essays, and letters to Olga manuscripts smuggled from prison became Bibles of resistance for intellectuals and activists. When Havel was released in 1989, still under surveillance and pressure, no one knew the regime had only weeks left to live. The Velvet Revolution erupted with breathtaking speed. Protesters filled Prague, refusing to back down. Havel became the revolution's moral nucleus, and in December 1989, he was elected president of Czechoslovakia without a single shot fired. His later presidency of the Czech Republic guided one of the smoothest transitions to democracy in modern history. His escape from repression reshaped not only a nation, but the map of Europe. Under Francisco Franco's dictatorship, Spain became a graveyard for dissent. Clara Pueyo Jornet, a resistance member of the Unified Socialist Party of Catalonia, was imprisoned for her activism. But in 1949, she executed one of the most daring escapes of the Franco era, breaking out of the notorious Les Corts prison in Barcelona. Though her personal fate remains partly obscured by censorship, her escape electrified the underground resistance. It punctured the myth of Franco's invincibility and became a legend whispered in safe houses and secret meetings. Her breakout did not topple the regime, but it kept the flame alive, feeding a narrative that Franco could be resisted, that women could fight, and that fascism was not permanent. Decades later, Spain's peaceful return to democracy built upon the legacy of those symbolic acts of defiance. In apartheid South Africa, Pretoria local prison was supposed to be escape-proof. The government proudly boasted of its impenetrable security until 1979. Activists Alex Moumbaris, Tim Jenkin, and Stephen Lee spent almost a year secretly crafting wooden keys, studying guard routines, and planning what became one of the world's most ingenious political prison escapes. When they finally opened door after door and slipped into the night, the apartheid regime suffered a massive humiliation. The escape made international headlines, exposing the system's brutality and incompetence. While the escape itself didn't bring down apartheid, it supercharged global condemnation and amplified support for the ANC abroad. Every escape is a story, and this story weakened the regime's narrative of control. In 1979, Assata Shakur, a former Black Panther and Black Liberation Army member, escaped from a maximum security prison in New Jersey. Convicted in a deeply controversial trial, she became both a revolutionary icon and one of the most polarizing figures in modern American history. After her escape, she fled to Cuba, where she was granted asylum in 1984 and remains to this day. Her case widened a political divide that still exists. To supporters, she represents resistance to racial injustice. To the US government, she is a convicted fugitive and domestic terrorist. Her escape strained US-Cuban relations for decades, and in 2013, she became the first woman ever placed on the FBI's Most Wanted Terrorists list. Her story continues to shape conversations about state power, policing, and protest in America. These 10 stories share a pattern. Governments believed that iron bars could stop ideas. They were wrong. Mandela walked out and ended apartheid. Havel walked out and ended a dictatorship. Mujica walked out and redefined leadership. Even the escapes that didn't topple a regime in the moment, like Clara Pueyo or Assata Shakur, reshaped political conversations, exposed abuses, or fueled movements that outlived the jailers themselves. A prison is meant to be an ending, but in these cases, it was a beginning. The door opened, and history changed.